Toward the end of the 12th century, the struggle for power between the Fujiwara clan and the imperial court had produced a third faction, the military officers, who began to assert control. The conflict by this time had destroyed much of the capital city and had seen the temples at Nara burned. Wars would continue to erupt periodically over the next 400 years as competing factions vied for power and aspiring leaders fought for the title of shogun. The Kamakura period, 1185 to 1333, is often grouped together with the subsequent Nambokucho period, 1336 to 1392, and the Muromachi period, 1392 to 1573, under the general heading of the medieval period, 1185 to 1573. Although we'll adhere to a chronology when possible, we'll examine art of the Japanese medieval period as a whole. Minamoto no Yoritomo, the military leader who had arisen victorious from the battle for power at the end of the 12th century, partly by conquering the forces of his brother, was named Seiitai Shogun, or Bohemian Subduing General, in 1192. Wanting to avoid the influence of the imperial court and the Buddhist temples around Nara, he established his military government, the Bakufu, or shogunate, at Kamakura. The period in which the Bakufu retained power, 1185 to 1333, is known as the Kamakura period. Despite its instability, the period witnessed a flourishing of the arts, particularly sculpture, partly because the old aristocracy, having lost its power, devoted itself to poetry, painting, and music. The new elite of the military, or samurai clans, were also important patrons of the arts. The samurai were especially important as patrons of the armorers. Prior to the Kamakura period, decoration on armor was reserved principally for suits worn for court ceremonies, but now it was applied to armor and weapons for field use as well. Japanese armorers were especially skillful at the use of metal alloys, and their work masterfully combined gold, silver, copper, and lead. This suit of armor dates to the early 14th century and would have been worn by a daimyo, or lord of a large estate. Known as yoroi, this type of armor was normally worn by a mounted warrior. The central part, or cuirass, is made of lacquered iron and leather. The lower section is a four-sided skirt. The ornamental parts are composed of silk, gilt copper, and doeskin. Originally it would have had white laces and multicolored lacings, representing a rainbow and symbolizing good fortune at the edges of the skirt, and the sode, or shoulder guards, which are now missing. The helmet, which has been together with this yoroi for a long time, actually dates a bit later, to the mid-14th century. Tradition suggests that this particular yoroi was donated to the Shinomura Hachimangu Shrine near Kyoto by Ashikaga Takauji, 1305 to 1358, who founded the Ashikaga shogunate. This suit of armor, which dates to the Muromachi period, is a style worn by foot soldiers that's called do-maru. It's made to encircle the soldier's body and to be laced up on the right side. The kusazuri, or skirt, of the do-maru is always composed of at least 5 sections, allowing easy movement of the legs. This example has more sections. This would later become a characteristic of mounted officers' armor as well. This suit of armor is thought to have been a gift from Date Masamune, a prominent daimyo, to Shiraishi Bungo, a samurai vassal of high rank. This type of helmet is known as Tsuji Kabuto, and the shape that it takes overall is called Akoda Nari. Akoda is a type of fruit. It was a popular helmet shape during the Muromachi period. Some of the mountings date to a later period. The bowl of the helmet is made of 52 ridged plates. An inscription, the character Kami, indicates that this helmet was made by the Haruta school of armorers located in Nara. The mon, or crest, on the turnbacks is for the Sanada family, who were the daimyo of Ueda. The earliest written records identify the sword as one of the three most important parts of Japanese imperial regalia. The others are the mirror and the jewel. Examples from as early as the 7th century have been preserved as sacred relics in temples and shrines. Some are even considered to be the dwelling places of Shinto deities. The long sword, called a tachi, was carried in a lacquer scabbard suspended by a cord or chain. The earliest blades are straight, but by the early Heian period, blades had acquired a curve. In the Kamakura period, sword blades became broader. Traditionally, swords were made by repeated folding and hammering of the steel, then tempering it by heating it and quenching it in water. Evidence suggests that by the 10th century, steel swords were appreciated for their beauty as well as for their efficiency as weapons. The aesthetic elements are principally the grain of the blade's body and the hamon, or pattern of the crystalline structure along the edge. Variations in these characteristics can be used to determine the maker and the age of specific swords. Since the Heian period, it was customary for the swordsmith to sign the blade on the tang and indicate the province where it was made, and often the date as well. Tachi are probably the earliest examples of Japanese objects signed by their makers. This tachi has been signed with the name Kageyasu. Certain characteristics of the sword suggest that it was made in Bizen province in the early Kamakura period. Sword mountings were often elaborate, as is the case with this 14th century example. The hilt is covered in a silver-plated sheet of metal beneath an open-work design. The fittings are either relief gilt or smoothly polished gilt. The covering of the scabbard is shark skin that's been lacquered. The use of shark skin for scabbards began in the Kamakura period. The most aesthetically desirable covering was the skin of a sturgeon found in the South China Sea, since it created a plum blossom pattern when it was polished. This scabbard was made for the short sword, or uchigatana, or striking sword, which became more popular than the tachi during the 14th century. It was normally 14 to 24 inches in length, and was worn tied to the waist rather than suspended. Japanese swords consist of a number of metal fittings that could be disassembled. These fittings were sites for master craftsmen to display their technical and aesthetic skills. Sword hilts, or tsuba, were separate from the blades. The earliest examples were made of leather over an iron or wooden frame, but by the Muromachi period, tsuba were made entirely of iron or other metals such as copper, brass, shakudo, an alloy of copper, gold, and other metals, or shibuichi, a 4-part mixture of silver and copper, tin, zinc, or lead. Tsuba were made in a variety of forms, each with a distinctive nomenclature. This example is of the style known as ko kachushi, which was introduced as early as the late Kamakura period. The word kachushi means armorer, and the name was given to the style because the raised rim was made through a controlled hammerwork typical of armorers. The openwork design on this tsuba was made by punching, and represents snowflakes. This tsuba was made by the Saotome school in the late Muromachi to early Momoyama period. It's made of iron with other metals, and the openwork design is of pine trees. This more complex tsuba is of a style known as Heianjo, Heian being the old name for Kyoto. The main material is iron, but it's also composed of brass and copper. The design of chrysanthemums and other flowers has been stamped onto the surface, and then in a technique called hirazogan, a contrasting metal has been inlaid and polished flush with the surface. Bronze mirrors in the Kamakura period developed a thicker rim than was typical in the Heian period, and the designs became more naturalistic and animated. Generally, the whole surface is in high relief. There are frequently concentric ridges. The mirror on the left is 4 inches in diameter and is decorated with relief images of pines, wisteria, and birds. The mirror on the right is slightly larger at 4.5 inches in diameter. It's decorated with reliefs of birds and floral scrolls. This Kamakura period mirror is large, measuring about 8 inches in diameter. The imagery is of sparrows and chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums had been a popular motif on mirrors since the Lei Heian period, but during the Kamakura period, as in this example, they typically appear on a sandbank. This mirror from the Muromachi period is about 5 inches in diameter and is in the form of a stylized lotus. Its relief decoration depicts birds and butterflies. The especially high copper content of Japanese bronze caused it to acquire a dark patina. The reflective surfaces could be made brighter by applying a molten tin, and this led to a trade in which families specialized in tinning and polishing mirrors. In the Muromachi period, the central boss, which was pierced so that a loop of ribbon or cord could be attached and used as a handle, was often in the shape of a turtle. This 15th century mirror is decorated with a popular image of Horaizan, the Chinese island of immortality. In that context, the turtle, or tortoise, is an apt symbol of longevity. On this example, there are also cranes, pine trees, and an image of Aizan Myo-o, an esoteric Buddhist deity. A great variety of metal objects were made during the medieval period. The inscription on this hanging lantern, which suggests that it was made in 1319, makes it the oldest dated example of its type. It was made by Sadasumi of Owari Province and was at one time owned by Choyoji Temple in Hakusan. Its designs are typical of the Kamakura period. It's hexagonal in form, and its sides are decorated with openwork patterns and pine bark diamonds, linked tortoise shells, and linked jewels. On the door are Sanskrit characters and a pair of Kongo Rikishi, or guardians of Buddhism. This Kamakura period gilt bronze object dates to the late 13th century. It's an example of another sacred object associated with esoteric Buddhism. A chakra, or wheel, it's a common Buddhist symbol. It relates to the phrase, turning of the wheel of the law, which refers to Shaka's act of teaching. In India, the wheel became an early symbol of the Buddha himself. In the context of esoteric Buddhism, the chakra was thought to have the power to overcome delusions. In this example, the 8 spokes of the wheel are shaped like a vajra. The hub of the wheel is in the form of a lotus flower with 8 petals. Flower petals are repeated on the outer wheel. This is another 13th century gilt bronze object associated with esoteric Buddhism. A kasha, or incense burner, it would have been situated at the center of an altar surrounded by offerings to a deity. The incense smoke would have purified both the deity and the worshipper. There are 3 main parts to the kasha: a lid, a middle section, and a main chamber with 3 legs. The knob of the lid represents a jewel, and the smoke of the burning incense would have exited through the 6 openings that are cut in the shape of clouds. This late Kamakura period gilt bronze piece is a nimbus, or halo, that would have been set behind a Buddhist sculpture. One of the characteristics of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is that they emit light, and the nimbus represents this. There are 2 parts: the round head nimbus with a lotus at its center, and the body nimbus. Because these shapes together resemble a boat, this type of nimbus has been designated the boat-shaped nimbus. This is a Nagoro-style lacquerware tray that was carved from keyaki wood using a lathe. The surface was covered first with a layer of black lacquer, and then with a red lacquer that covered all but the high points of the surface. This created an irregular, natural decoration. Over time, the marks from eating utensils marred the surface and added to the black pattern. Such effects were highly valued by tea masters in later periods. There's an inscription on the tray that indicates that it was made in 1298 and was one of a set of 26. These would have been used in March of each year during the Omizutori ritual by the 26 Rengyoshu, or secluded monks, as serving trays to hold rice and soup bowls. In general, the decoration on lacquerware during the Kamakura period became finer than during the Heian period. This black lacquer container, a toiletry box from the 13th century, has makie scenes of flying geese and cypress trees, done in the Karae style. The landscape is of Mount Horai, a mountain that's described in Chinese Taoism as a source of an elixir of eternal life. This circular mirror box is believed to date from the 13th to 14th centuries, although the style was much copied after the Kamakura period, so it could have been made later. It's an example of the hiramakie technique, in which gold powder was applied to a thin layer of lacquer and then burnished to give the appearance of a surface of solid gold. Mother of pearl has also been inlaid in the lacquer to form the floral design. The wood used for the base of this box is white cypress, which doesn't warp and doesn't exude resin. The date of this lidded box is also uncertain. Most of the technical and stylistic characteristics are typical of the Kamakura period, and it's thought to have come from a temple in Kamakura. It combines makie elements with shell and sheet metal inlay. Some of the elements, however, the butterfly wings, which have been inlaid in pewter, and some of the motifs that have been incorporated, suggest that this could be work made during the revival of interest in Kamakura-style lacquerware in the 17th century. This Muromachi period mirror case measures only 3 inches in diameter. It has a raised lid that's edged with tin. On the lid is a pattern with 7 sets of 3 hexagonal tortoiseshell elements. In the center of each hexagon is a diamond-shaped flower. 3 of the triple hexagon motifs are made of inlaid mother of pearl. Although this box was originally part of a toiletry kit, it seems to have been used at a later date as a container for incense. This black lacquer Suzuri Bako, or writing box, with gold and silver makie, dates to the 16th century. Its straight beveled edges and tin rims on the base and lid are characteristic of the late Muromachi period. The technique, which developed during the Muromachi period, is known as takamakie. Since the Song dynasty, the Chinese had practiced forms of lacquer working in relief. The most complicated version was to carve a lacquer surface that had been built up to a certain thickness through as many as 250 thin layers of lacquer. This technique became popular in Japan during the Muromachi period. It was an exacting and time-consuming craft, and as a consequence, a quicker version of the technique, called kamakurabori, was developed, in which the wooden core was carved with relief elements, and these were covered with red or black lacquer. Red or black carved relief lacquerwares were popular during the Muromachi period, when a strong taste for Chinese style prevailed. The red versions are known as tsuishu, and the black versions are called tsuikoku. This writing box was made in another, related technique called takamakie, in which the relief elements are built up by applying successive layers of lacquer over primer. The writing box is also a good example of utae, or poetry that has been written in characters hidden within a picture. Utae was popular in the courts and among the merchant class of the Muromachi period. On this box, incorporated into the design in silver, are the written characters Tama, Ge, Futa, Mino, Ni, and Yuru, which represent a poem by Onaka Tomi Sukehiro. The complete poem is: the bejeweled thickets by the sea of Futa Migaura Bay, the clusters of pines look like makie lacquer. The scene is of Futa Migaura near Ise, one of the most important of Shinto shrines. This is another Muromachi period writing box with Uta-e. The poem comes from the poetry anthology Kokin Wakashu. Characters from the poem are incorporated into the rocks. The full poem is: Plovers that inhabit the rocky coast of the Salt Cape, sing that the region of your majesty may last forever. The lid has been decorated using several different lacquerware techniques. The birds are rendered in gold makie and silver inlay